That's very kind. Thanks, Max. I appreciate that. These headsets are always a little bit weird, aren't they? I feel like I'm in some weird like expo maybe, like a Tesla thing or something, but hopefully I won't break any glass tonight, right? But it's a nerdy joke, right? Anyway, thank you so much all of you for coming down and for taking the time to listen to what I have to say. We're going to talk about a whole range of different things, right? And the first thing I always like to tell people before I start talking in depth about these issues is please don't believe a word of anything that I say, right? I'm going to talk about studies, I'm going to talk about legal practices, I'm going to talk about things that we do, and I want you to take everything I say as being something that I'm saying to mislead you, right? And then take what I say and scrutinize it, and then either ask me questions at the end about it, or go home and do your own research, because I think that's what's really important, right? We can listen to speakers, we can watch TED speakers, we can watch documentaries, and we can have a habit of taking everything that's said on face value, and I think it's really important that we don't do that, and that we challenge everything that we hear. So, use what I say, if you would like to, as an intriguing thought to maybe make you go and look everything up yourself tonight, if you have some time. Okay. Before I start talking too much, I want to kind of let you know about who I am and why I care about these issues, because I think it's important to establish why I care and why I got to doing what I do. And so I think I always make this gamble, and it normally is about 99% right. And I normally say, look, I think that everyone else in this room, I was the same as you, in the sense of I was born eating meat, dairy, and eggs, right? I don't really know many people who were born vegan, and I certainly wasn't one of them. I was raised in a family where we used to laugh about being vegetarian, right? We thought vegetarianism was hilarious. We didn't know what a vegan was when I was growing up, but vegans are only safe because we'd never heard of them, right? Which is sad, I suppose, in a way. But being vegetarian, right? We used to sit around the dinner table, we'd be eating our steak or our chicken breast, and my stepdad would say something like, do you know what the best thing about having a vegetarian round for dinner is? And I would answer by going, more meat for us. And then we'd all laugh about it, right? Because it's just not funny at all, right? It really isn't. But we used to think it was hilarious. I remember being 12 years old, and I was sat in an English literature class, and we were studying a book. And in the book, one of the characters was vegetarian. And so my teacher asks, she says, what do you think about being vegetarian? I put my hand up in the air, I'm about 12 years old, and my teacher says, yes, Edward. And I say, all vegetarians are pale, weak, and skinny, right? Which was funny. I was like the weakest and skinniest in the room, and I ate meat twice a day at least, right? It's just ridiculous. But at 12 years old, I didn't know what irony was, I don't think, right? Behind me was a girl called Natasha. So I turned to look at Natasha, thinking that she'd give me a thumbs up and be like, I feel weak and skinny all the time, Ed, well done, yeah. But surprisingly not. So I turned and looked at her, and she was really angry at me. Like, she was furious, like she was so cross. I remember being a little bit taken aback. So I turned from Natasha and looked up at my teacher, thinking my teacher might validate me. But instead my teacher looked really worried, like she was super concerned, like she was going to get into trouble because she'd made someone angry in the classroom. I said a lot of things when I was 12 years old that obviously didn't make a lot of sense, were ridiculous, nonsensical. But I remember that bit, and I think the reason I do is because it reminds me how as children we're like sponges. What I mean by that is we just absorb information that's given to us, or we're like a blank canvas. The values, beliefs, lifestyles, morals, the way that we think, the way that we see the world is almost wholly dictated to us by our families, by our cultures, by our traditions, by our environments, by our societies. And so we reach a certain age where we take everything that's been given to us on face value again. And so what that means is that when we're confronted with an idea that maybe we've not thought about before, we really just regurgitate the information that's been given to us. For me, that was, we need protein from meat, right? And if you don't get protein from meat, you're going to shrivel away and die. And you need calcium from cow's milk, and if you don't drink cow's milk, you're going to get brittle bones and osteoporosis, right? That was the narrative that was sold to me, and that was the narrative I believed and never questioned, because why would we question the things that we're told? I mean, thinking about it, when we're children, we rely on the information that's given to us as being honest and trustworthy, because most of it is. Most of it's about our survival and our safety. Think about when we were living in kind of like nomadic tribes. Our parents told us not to eat this certain plant or to avoid this specific animal. And so we connotate what we're told as being a necessity for living. And so if part of that necessity or part of what we're told is you need to eat meat, then we hold on to that as if it's gospel and it's true. And we don't analyze our actions as much as we should. Okay. Now let's go back 7 years, right? So I'm 18 years old, and I am ordering a pizza with a friend. My friend's vegetarian. I am not even close. In fact, I liked my friend being vegetarian because he didn't talk to me about it. I thought it was quite cute. I was like, oh, look at my friend. Like, he cares and all, that's nice, but he just doesn't mention it to me, which is the best thing of all. But we're ordering a pizza one night, just one pizza, and he says, well, Ed, why don't we just get the vegetarian pizza and you can share it? And I looked at him and said, this is obviously a joke. Right? There is no way that this isn't a joke. You know me better than this. Come on, start laughing. And he was like, well, why not? I said, well, it's very simple. Why not? There's a very simple answer to that question. I can't believe you've asked me. I said, it's because bacon goes on pizza, right? And if there's no bacon on top of the pizza, that's not a real pizza. That's some fake pizza. And I'm not spending my money on no fake pizza, right? Come on. And he said, well, Ed, why should an animal die for a pizza topping? I said, what do you mean a pizza topping? We give pigs life. They live a very happy life in a farm. Of course, they're slaughtered, but it's humane, so don't worry about it. And then at the end, I get bacon. It's called the food chain, for goodness sake, right? Life and then bacon. Amazing. Those natural food chains, right? Perfect. Life and bacon, right? He wasn't very happy with that answer, but I was too stubborn to care, and so we got half and half, veggie and bacon, opposite halves. Now let's go back 5.5 years ago, May 2014. I am reading the BBC online on my computer, and I come across a story, and the story is about a truck carrying 6,000 chickens crashing on the way to a slaughterhouse near a city called Manchester, which is in northern England. And I'm reading this story, and I'm reading about the fact that 1,500 of the animals have died from the impact alone. 1,500 lives just gone. That's not really what upset me. What upset me more was the fact there were hundreds more of these animals who were alive, but they had broken bones, broken wings, broken beaks. They were being crushed, they were mutilated, they were suffering and in pain. And I made a very simple realization, which is, of course, so obvious. The animals I consume have the capacity to suffer and feel pain, and therefore have a preference to avoid suffering and pain. But that was a bit uncomfortable for me, because in my fridge was fried chicken, and KFC was my favorite food when I used to eat animals. I had a KFC that was a 5-minute walk from where I used to live, which is dangerously close. 5 minutes. That is close. And so I went there so often that the people who worked there knew my name and knew what my favorite order was, which was a Zinger box meal. You just get a hash brown in there. It's called Towering Up. So I wasn't feeling too good about myself, because there's the reason in my fridge for what's happening to these animals. Now, of course, the truck was a rarity, the crash. And so I did some more research. I looked at the farming, I looked at the slaughter. I felt even more uncomfortable. I felt dreadful. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. And so I reached a crossroad in my life. I could do one of two things. The first thing I could do was I could bury my head in the sand, right? Just pretend, look, Ed, you've clicked on this article, your curiosity got the better of you, but just pretend you didn't. Go back 10 minutes, just keep scrolling and forget about it, right? You're 19, 20, you've got maybe another 60, 70 years if you're doing good, so maybe just try and ignore it for as long as you can. Maybe you won't feel like a hypocrite forever. Didn't feel good, right? So I had another option. Now, I believe that when we learn something, we have a responsibility to act on that. Now, what I mean is, right, I don't know if you guys have seen the original Spider-Man movies. You know, I'm not talking these new ones, they're crap. I'm talking about the old ones, right, with Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe when he's the Green Goblin, and it's like amazing. Anyway, in there, Uncle Ben, he has this line, which is quite profound. He says, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Cheesy, I know, but I think that knowledge is power. And so when we learn something, or we become educated about something that we didn't know about before, we have a responsibility to act on what it is that we've learned, because to not act is an injustice, not only to our values and what we say, but to those who have been negatively impacted by us ignoring what it is that we've learned. And so I changed, but only to vegetarian, right? And I was one of these vegetarians who thought vegans were mental. Oh, Christ. I couldn't stand vegans. I thought they were self-righteous. I thought they were arrogant. I thought they had no sense of humor. I was like, for goodness sake, vegans, crack a smile. It's not going to kill you, right? Like, cows produce milk and hens lay eggs. So just get on with your life and let me do my thing, right? But then I was forced to watch a documentary called Earthlings. I say forced. I wasn't forced. I willfully watched a documentary called Earthlings with lots of persuasion. And afterwards, right, I was shell-shocked. Because this documentary, which is free to watch on YouTube, talks about all the different ways that we use animals. So not just meat, not even just dairy and eggs as well, but also clothing, so leather and fur, also things like circuses and aquariums. So lots of different ways that we use animals. Afterwards, the film's about 90 minutes, an hour 40. It's brutal, like I'm not going to lie to you. It's a horrible film to watch. And afterwards, I was feeling pretty upset, pretty shell-shocked. And so I said to myself, I need to get a bit of tender, loving care right from Rupert the hamster. Because I had a little hamster at the time, a little pet, called Rupert. I loved Rupert so much. And any time I felt sad, I'd just watch him eat, I'd feed him some food, he'd just eat, and I'd just be like, wow, God, it's just so cute, right? So I thought, you know what, the hamster's eating, man, it's just amazing, right? So I thought, you know what, I'm going to get Rupert out, I'm going to give him some broccoli, and everything's going to be amazing. So I get Rupert out. He's running on my hands and on my arms, and I'm looking at Rupert. He's eating his broccoli, and I say to myself, wow, Rupert's such a little individual, right? Got so much about him, such a little personality. So Rupert loves broccoli, but he didn't like kale very much. Oh, he didn't like kale. He loved broccoli. Best food ever. If you gave Rupert broccoli, you could almost see him smiling. He was so happy, which is, implausible for a hamster, of course. It's quite sad. I studied German at school. I didn't learn too much. But one of the things that I did learn is mein Hamster ist gestorben, which is... I never thought I'd have to use that line seriously, right? But Rupert ist sehr gestorben. But before he was gestorben, Rupert had a little personality. And he was also so lazy, was Rupert the hamster. God, he was lazy. With like hamsters, right? You get them the wheels, and they run in those wheels for days or something. You get them the balls, and you put them in the ball, and they like scoot around the floor. Well, I bought Rupert a ball. I just thought it'd be amazing, because he could like run around the room, and I'd be like, oh. Every time I put him in there, he would just take the food he'd stored from his cheeks and eat, and he wouldn't run anywhere, right? Rupert was so lazy, man, so lazy. But he was unique in that way. And I was looking at Rupert, and I thought, you know what, bless Rupert. I like him, but he's not the most intelligent animal that's ever walked this earth, He's pretty great, but in terms of his intellectual capacity, he's okay. And I thought, well, if I recognize so much in Rupert, right, so much within him, then I have to recognize those traits and attributes within the animals like the pigs and the cows, the sheep, the chickens as well, who are killed every single day for products that I buy and consume. And if I wouldn't want anyone to hurt Rupert because of these reasons, then what right do I have to pay for animals who are similar in every single way that matters to him, to have suffering and pain inflicted upon them? Didn't add up to me. And that's when I went vegan. But again, I was one of these vegans, right, that was quiet. I didn't want to be labeled as preachy, right? I don't care about that too much now, right, as you can probably tell. But back in the day, right, years ago, I didn't want to be called preachy. I was at university at the time, so I'd go in there and I'd eat my lentils and just do my thing. I wouldn't say a word to anyone. Then I saw a documentary called Cowspiracy on Netflix. This documentary talks about all the different ways that eating animals is bad for the environment. Now, being at university, I had a lot of friends at the time who were quite environmentally focused and cared a lot about climate change. And so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go into university. I'm going to tell my friends to watch this film. They're going to watch it, and then we're going to be one big vegan family, and we'll eat lentils together and talk about like animals and shit. It'll be amazing, right? So I go into university. I'm like, you guys, watch this film on Netflix called Cowspiracy. It'll change the way that you view animal products that you eat. And they were like, so about it. And this one girl called Rihanna, she looks at me and she says, you know what, Ed? I think it's great you're vegan. It's great. But the thing is, you consume soya products, and soya farming is destroying the Amazon rainforest, right? So you can tell me that it's bad for me to eat meat, but while you're consuming soya, you're the one responsible for destroying the Amazon. I was taken back for a moment, because I'd not heard about this before. And I thought, me? 2% of the population, at that point, veganism was probably 0.5% of the population, in fairness. I thought, are we really the ones destroying the Amazon? It didn't seem right, but I didn't know what to say to her. And I thought, well, I do consume soy products, so logically speaking, it would make sense for it to be me. So I went home that day, and I Googled it. Classic, right? Is soya farming bad for the Amazon rainforest? Whoa, lo and behold, soya farming is devastating. It's one of the biggest contributors to Amazon deforestation next to cattle ranching and deforestation for timber. But actually what I learned is it's not because of vegans. It's because up to 85% of all the soya that is grown globally is fed to livestock animals. And that 85% that's grown is grown in the Amazon. Or actually the soya that's grown for vegans is grown in places, well, across Europe, mainly France actually for a lot of European soya, but also in North America for those products that are produced in North America. And so actually the problem related to soya in the Amazon isn't because of vegans, it's because of people that eat animals, because those animals are fed the soya that's grown in the Amazon. I thought if I'd known that, if only I'd known that, I could have said that to her, couldn't I? And then she'd have had to have admitted defeat because she would have explained why she should be vegan. But at the same time, she wouldn't have. She'd have just said something else, right? Like that's the way it goes. But at least I could have said that to her, and I'd have proved it wrong a little bit. But I did a little bit more research, a little bit more digging, because I was quite interested. My curiosity was piqued, so to speak. So I carried on researching, carried on looking into it, and actually what surprised me about the soya farming aspect is we often look at red meat, don't we? Cows and sheep, primarily, as being the ones responsible for the environmental problems associated with eating animal products. But with the soya, in the UK, we import between 1.83 and 2.5 million tons of soya every single year from the Amazon rainforest, just the livestock animals in our country. That equates to about 900,000 to 1.5 million hectares of Amazonian rainforest being cleared just to produce soya in the UK alone. Right? But actually in Europe, over 50% of the soya that we import as animal feed from the Amazon rainforest is actually fed to chickens for their meat and for their eggs. And so when we look at soya farming in the Amazon and the problems caused by soya farming in the Amazon, the biggest culprit of that problem is the chicken meat, or those free-range eggs that we fry up and have for breakfast, because that comes from animals who are fed feed, a lot of that which came from the Amazon and the soya farming, which is interesting because a lot of us, we stop consuming red meat for environmental reasons and start consuming more eggs, right, or more chicken, more white meat. We see globally chicken meat increasing in Western countries while red meat decreases because it's seen as a sustainable alternative. But actually when we buy chicken in the supermarket, there's a whole chain behind it, and that chain could well have started in the Amazon with the soya being produced there, or even with the deforestation before it to produce land to grow the soya. And so there's a whole chain of command in place there that means that actually simply buying something in a supermarket, as we do know logically, has a huge amount before it. And with the case of chicken, it starts with the soya in the Amazon, which I think is interesting. Anyway, let's move that conversation on a little bit. There was a 5-year study released last year by the University of Oxford. This 5-year study looked at 40,000 farms in 119 countries around the world. It is considered the most comprehensive analysis ever conducted exploring the relationship between farming and the environment. And it was published in a journal called Science, which is one of the most highly regarded scientific journals in the world. It looked at the 40 major food items that make up 90% of our diet globally, and it compared the impact of these food items to the environment. And so it looked at animal-based products and also plant-based products as well. And it looked at land usage, because when we talk about agriculture, land usage is one of the most important factors when it comes to the ecological damage caused by what we consume. It said that globally, 83% of all agricultural land is given to animals, or animal agriculture. So that's the croplands, the land where we grow crops to feed the animals. It's also the land where these animals graze, and it's the actual farm sites themselves. Seems like a lot, doesn't it? But 50% of the crops that we grow are given to animals anyway, and 1/4 of the Earth's total usable land surface is given to grazing animals. That 1/4 figure comes from a study called Grazed and Confused, which was an international team of researchers that was commissioned by the United Nations. And so it's quite easy to see how it stacks up quickly, the amount of land being given to animal agriculture. Now the problem with that wouldn't necessarily be the issue of the land usage, it's about the output of food as a consequence. 83% could be justified if animals were taking up 83% of our diet in terms of nutrition and calories, but that's certainly not the case. This 5-year study said that actually only around 39% of our global protein is given to us by animals, and as little as around 20% of global calories are given to us by animals, which means there's a huge disparity, right, where we're dedicating so much land to something that actually is offering us very little in return. Certainly not justifiable in terms of the amount of land that is used and consumed for these products. That's alarming, because to clear land for agriculture requires exactly that, clearing land. As that means that actually animal agriculture is the leading cause of things like deforestation and also biodiversity loss, because to make way for grazing animals or growing croplands or making crops for animals requires us destroying what comes in the way. And so I was born in a place called Yorkshire, which is northern England. Now in Yorkshire, I was always told that we were very proud of our landscape. We have something called the Yorkshire Dales. We're like rolling hills of the Yorkshire Dales. I used to get driven round and we'd say, bask in the wonder of the Yorkshire Dales. Isn't it marvellous? I never thought it was marvellous. I always found it pretty boring, to be honest, but I was told to think it was marvellous, right? But they're wrong. The Yorkshire Dales, I shouldn't be so cynical, should I? The Yorkshire Dales, right, it's just fields everywhere. Now, I've been getting the train through the Netherlands and through Germany as well, working my way down to Switzerland, and I've seen a very similar story, which is that our countries are just covered in fields. And on those fields, sometimes we have cows used for their milk, we have cattle used for their flesh and skin, and we have sheep and lambs used for their milk, wool, and flesh as well. But actually, that's not what our countries are supposed to look like. We're not supposed to be covered in fields. We're supposed to be covered in dense forestlands and woodlands. Even temperate rainforests can be found across Europe, and we destroyed so much of it. Of course, yes, for cities, for roads, but for agriculture, with up to 83% of that being used for animals. In fact, if you think about that 83%, that is a Western figure as well. In the UK, DEFRA, which is our Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, our government organisation, they say that 71% of the entire landmass of the UK is given to agriculture, with around 80 to 85% of that being given to animals, which means in the UK, 60% or so of our entire landmass is given to animals, which is startling. Now, the problem with destroying land, of course, is twofold, because trees absorb carbon through photosynthesis, which is a really useful feature, actually. But when we destroy these trees, the carbon is emitted back into the atmosphere. Let's take the wildfires that have been happening this year. The wildfires in Siberia, so the vicious wildfires in Siberia this summer. Now, by the end of those wildfires, it was reported that as much carbon was emitted back into the atmosphere, the amount of carbon was equal to the amount of carbon that a country like Sweden emits an entire year. So just one of the wildfires, of which there have been many this year, and indeed every year, was responsible for emitting as much carbon back into the atmosphere as a developed Western country was. The problem, obviously, with more carbon is less water availability, more droughts, more wildfires means more carbon, less droughts, more droughts, less water availability, more wildfires. We call it a self-perpetuating cycle, of course. So what we desperately need more of is trees. But the thing is, we're clearing away huge amounts of land, that land being forests and woodlands, and what we're putting in its place are animals. Animals that produce greenhouse gases. Because the United Nations says that, conservatively speaking, animals are responsible for 14.5% of all worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. Now, that doesn't sound like a huge figure, I appreciate it, but it's actually more than all of the transportation system combined. So more than all the planes, all the cars, all the boats combined. Obviously, there's a big conversation about flying, and rightfully so, because flying is a huge problem when it comes to the environment. But so are the animals as well. And of course, we're talking about cattle and sheep primarily. And so we're taking away, or we have taken away, one of the best defenses that we have against climate change. And in its place, we're putting one of the biggest contributors to overall ecological disaster and degradation. Doesn't seem like a good idea to me. Now, by 2050, the United Nations says there might be 10 billion people on this planet, 10 billion. So just over 2 billion more than there is now. The problem is, by 2050, we're going to have encountered more problems, aren't we? Because as temperatures increase, what we see is, of course, more droughts. So less water availability means less food being produced for many people. Also, temperatures in certain areas might exceed living conditions, and also extreme weather conditions like flooding, cyclones, different things, wildfires, of course, might mean that people can't live in the areas that they've conventionally lived. And so we'll have something called climate refugees. Now, climate refugees, by the end of this century, could be tens, hundreds of millions in principle. And the problem is they're going to have to migrate somewhere. And the areas where they're going to migrate, well, they're going to be Europe, aren't they? North America, up into Canada. And so the problem then is we have more people on this planet, but we have less space and less resources. And so we have to be more efficient. Well, how can we be more efficient on an animal-based diet? Because animals consume so many of our resources anyway. In fact, currently, animal agriculture takes up 45% of the Earth's total ice-free land already. And now we're going to have another 2 billion people in, 30 years maybe? And we're supposed to feed them on the same diet that we've been consuming? There's a problem. And that problem is it's not functional or practical or plausible. And so we need to use our land and our energy and our resources more efficiently. This 5-year study, it said that if the world shifted, or at least if the majority of us shifted to a plant-based diet, we could free up the amount of agricultural land that we need by 75%. Now, of course, more vegans means more humans consuming more plants, but the number of plants that will grow overall will drastically decrease. Put into perspective, cows, to produce 1 kilogram of cow flesh takes about 12 to 16 kilograms of plants. Now, some estimates place it as over 20 kilograms to produce 1 kilogram of cow flesh. It'll take 12 to 16 to be conservative. 10 to 12 kilograms for 1 kilogram of lamb, 6 to 8 kilograms for 1 kilogram of pig, and about 3 to 1 when it comes to chicken. And so we see that we're using huge amounts of plants to produce something that actually, in terms of output, is significantly lower than what we'd get from the plants themselves. So we could free up 75% of global farmland by switching to a plant-based diet. We could do a number of things with that land. Of course, with a growing population, we could grow more food for humans. A study from Harvard Law School called Eating Away at Climate Emissions said that if you take the croplands just in the US that are used to feed animals, so this is just the land that's used to feed animals in the US alone, you could grow enough human edible food on that land to feed another 320 million people. They said in the UK, the same study, if you took 1/3 of the croplands that we use in the UK to feed animals, you could produce enough fruits and vegetables on that land to feed every single person in Great Britain their 5 recommended portions of fruit and vegetables every day, all year round, which is 1/3. So we have to start thinking proactively about what's on our plates. Because the thing is, to talk about climate change and not talk about animal agriculture is to talk about lung cancer and not talk about smoking. Because the reality is what we consume has a direct impact every single day. And actually, it's not about the impact, it's also about the possibility for change and the benefits of that change if we enact and change our behavior as well. So, with this 75% of land that we'd free up, we could grow more food for humans. We could also do something called rewilding. I love the concept of rewilding. It's as basically as it sounds, right? You take land and you encourage it to come back to its more natural state. And so that would be forests and woodlands in many areas, of course, across Europe. That's great for a few reasons. Obviously, it increases biodiversity, which is important because when we look at biodiversity, we look at insects, but we also look at just larger animals as well. It's a huge problem, species extinction and biodiversity loss. So more homes for animals, but also more healthy soil, more trees, more woodlands, more forests, more sequestration of carbon through photosynthesis. We could take some of that carbon back from our atmosphere if we were planting trees again and rewilding the natural landscapes. We could also do something called trophic rewilding, which is introducing natural animals back into their homes. Someone did this in America. They bought out a cattle ranch in, I think it might have been Montana, but I might be wrong. They bought out a cattle ranch, and where the cattle used to be, they put a herd of bison, because bison are indigenous to the lands. But they don't kill the bison. They're not there for food. They're there for the ecology, because bison are incredibly adapted to their natural landscape as animals are, so their hooves cut through the grass as they walk. And by cutting the grass as they walk, it encourages sequestration of carbon back into the soil. It's a wonderful system because they're indigenous to those landscapes. And so it's about taking our land back to a way that it used to be as much as is feasibly possible, of course. We can never make it natural and wild in the truest sense, but we can return it to some resemblance of what it should be, because the way it should be in that sense was ecologically more harmonious. We could rewild that land, introduce animals back in, take carbon from our atmosphere, and also, as well, take out one of the biggest problems, the animals. Because they consume so much food, they produce so many emissions. And in terms of water, we're talking about 25% to 1/3 of all global fresh water being given to livestock animals, which is absurd. Scientists are saying that in the future we may have wars over water. If we're fighting over water, do we have the luxury to be giving water to cows so we can drink their milk? It seems like an absurd use of water, for the future at least, and even for now. Okay. Let's move the conversation on. That 5-year study concluded by saying the single biggest thing that we can do as individuals to have a positive impact on our planet is to adopt a vegan lifestyle. The single biggest thing that we can do. And so in terms of the conversation of what we should be doing, well, that has to be at the top of one of the things that as individuals we should be doing, because if we don't, then that creates a huge amount of problems for the future. Now remember that climate change is a social justice issue, right? What I mean by social justice issue is that it's affecting those who have the least to cause it the most severely already, and will continue to do that into the future. And so for us, climate change isn't necessarily tangible in the realist sense. What I mean by that is we have 45 degrees Celsius heat in Paris this summer. We have breaking temperatures, record-breaking temperatures throughout Europe, but then it gets cold again, right? And it snows again. And it's easy for us to think that actually it's not that big a deal. But actually, for many people already it is. And let's say we get to 2050 or 2060. When we look back, what we say about the things that we did as individuals. Now, of course, we have to demand system change, legislative change, but the two things have to work in tandem, because governments won't change if they're not seeing an appetite, pardon the pun, within the people, within the citizens. It is we citizens who must ask and demand a mandate for the government to change. And so if we don't change as individuals, we can't expect them to employ or to enact legislation that forces us to change. It's simply too dangerous. Look in Paris, the Gilets jaunes protests started last year because of an eco-fuel tax, a supposedly environmental measure that caused huge amounts of civil unrest and political turmoil. So citizens have to ask for these changes by showing that there's a hunger and that we're willing to make those changes ourselves. If as governments will be too afraid to force us to do things because they'll lose votes, and it could create civil unrest. So we also have to champion and lead the way when it comes to environmental measures as well. And that's looking at our individual responsibility as well as a community responsibility. Okay. Let's move on. It gets a bit heavy. I talk. Okay, let's move on. Okay. And now I want to move on to a little bit more past the environment, right? Because I think it's important that we acknowledge the environmental benefits of looking at how we consume and being more conscious about consumer choices, but really there's more to it than that, isn't there? Because when we talk about veganism, to put veganism and the environment as being the sole reason for veganism is to create an injustice in terms of the philosophical foundations of what it means to live vegan. That's convoluted. Let me explain a little bit clearer. Right? Veganism is a moral and ethical pursuit to create in a world where we treat others with more respect and dignity. Now, I want to go through some of the most common arguments and reasons that we give to not want to look at our dinner plates and our lunch meals and our breakfasts. And the first thing that people often say to me when I bring up the notion of veganism, the first thing they do is normally groan. Right? I did a talk this morning at school. And I said, hey, I'm here to talk about veganism. And this one girl, right, she went, oh. And I was like, you don't have to like me, but you do have to listen to me, right? Right, anyway. And now one of the first things that people say to me is they say, look, Ed, I think it's great you're vegan. And I actually really respect that. I'm really proud of you. I think it's wonderful you live in a society where you have that choice and you've personally chosen to do that. But I just ask in return that, you respect my choice, right? You respect me for what I personally choose to eat, because after all, it is a personal choice. And I really don't appreciate vegans who try to force their views. I think there's a lot of interesting elements to that. And I think the most interesting element to it is that actually, yes, it is a personal choice. What we choose to do with our lives is entirely up to us. We leave this room tonight and we go and get some dinner. We have a choice between buying steak, chicken breasts, lamb, salmon, tuna, a chickpea curry, a tofu stir fry. We have a choice of what we want to consume. That's great. Choice is good. But at the end of the day, just because we personally choose to do something, does that make the action itself morally justifiable just simply because we personally choose to do it? If I elaborate, let's say I leave today, I'm feeling a bit peckish, want to get that tofu stir fry I just talked about, and I think, well, actually, I've not got enough cash to get that. And I really want to eat it, so I'm going to mug someone. I'm going to take their wallet off them, right, so I can buy my tofu stir fry. Now, I've personally chosen to do that, right? It doesn't mean that it's a moral act. Huge difference, of course. Mugging someone is quite simply illegal, right? We recognize it's a criminal offense. But actually buying a steak from Lidl is perfectly legal. No one's going to come and arrest you for it. But the question then is, well, does legality equal morality? Is something acceptable simply because the law says so? Well, let's look through our history and think of examples of systems, behaviors, actions, industries that were legal, but were certainly not moral. And if we subscribe to the idea that legality does equal morality, that would mean that the legal systems in every individual country would make it moral the things under those laws? We can think of many legal systems around the world that are certainly not moral. So legality doesn't equal morality, and a personal choice shouldn't simply be respected because it's a personal choice, because every choice we make has the capacity to be moral or immoral, not stipulated by the fact it is a personal choice, but by more of an objective sense of what it is to be right and wrong. And actually, when it comes to forcing views, I couldn't, even if I wanted to, and I don't want to, but I can't follow you all home tonight, right? Watch you buy that tofu stir fry, make you eat it, and then tell you it's not that bad after all, right? Like, tofu isn't that bad, it's okay. Some of it's rubbish, some of it's great, okay, like hit and miss, but I like it. So I can't force you to do anything. I can't. Like, what you do on your own time is up to you. And no vegan can force you to be vegan. It's a strange idea, but how about this? Let's say we go and buy a steak from a supermarket, right? When we buy that steak, we have forced someone else to be killed on our behalf. Now, what could be more forceful than making someone have to live a life in a farm where they're mutilated, incarcerated, but then ultimately hung upside down and have their throat cut for our belief, the belief that I want to eat meat and dairy and eggs? What could be more forceful than that? I'm not sure. We'll move the conversation on a little bit more. Taste is the big one, right? People say to me, "You're vegan, Ed." I'm like, "I am, yeah." And they say, "Well, you've obviously never eaten a medium rare steak before. And also cheese. Oh, I love cheese. I couldn't go vegan, Ed. I just love cheese too much. It tastes too good," right? I get it. I used to like these things as well. And actually, I have never met a vegan. I lie. I've met one vegan, and I thought that they were strange. I met one vegan, and I said, "Why are you vegan?" And they said, "Well, to be honest, I just thought bacon, steak, and cheese didn't taste very nice." I thought, really? That's not normal. But that's the reality, isn't it? People don't go vegan because they stop enjoying how these things taste. We kind of ask a very simple question to ourselves. Let's create an imaginary weighing scales of sorts in front of us. And so on one side we place taste, right? I like how these things taste. And on the other side we place life. We say, what has higher value, taste or life? Because when we consume these products, and again, dairy and eggs still results in animals being killed, we create a situation where we say, what has higher value, taste or life? Now, to me, that was obviously life. Sometimes people say taste to me. Interesting, because actually when we say that taste is a moral justifier, what we're saying is that sensory pleasure provides a moral justification for what we do to others. Taste is a sense. I like how it tastes. It provides me with sensory pleasure. And so actually, when we look at that argument, we have to apply it somewhat consistently to other areas as well. And so we say, well, can we think of any situations, any environments, any actions where someone feels sensory pleasure at the expense of someone else? Unfortunately, we can think of many. And so we say, well, is that action morally justified simply because someone feels sensory pleasure? We say, well, of course not. Why would that make a difference? Why would it matter if someone felt good after doing it? That's not the point. The point is the person who's been victimized. Well, then why is it when the animals are the victims and they're the ones being victimized? That's not what's relevant. And all that matters is that we like how their flesh tastes, or we like how their secretions taste, or we like how their skin looks on us when we wear a leather coat or a fur coat or something. Why does it matter then? Or should I say, why does it not matter then when they look at the animals? I think that we have two options, right? There's no denying that as humans, intellectually and physically, we are dominant. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. Intellectually, we're incredible. We're so wonderful. What we can achieve is amazing. What we do is also sometimes catastrophically bizarre and devastating, but what we can achieve logically is unbelievable. So intellectually, of course, we reign dominant, but that means we have two options, doesn't it? And so we can do one of two things, really. Now, the first thing we can do is we can have some sort of authoritarian rule over animals, a sort of might makes right approach. I don't think we can deny that that's what we've done so far. When we breed these animals into existence, we mutilate them, we assign them an ear tag which has a numerical value on it, which is their identity, and so we take away their personality, their individualism, their right to be acknowledged as a someone. We refer to them as a commodity, an it, it, these animals are its, and then we eventually take their life from them when we want to. What could be more authoritarian than that? But we have another option, don't we? To be more like stewards, right? Stewards of the world. Now, this sounds a little bit utopian, doesn't it? A little bit maybe nonsensical. I get that. I'm not being naive. The world that I'm talking about isn't a world where we're skipping down the road and we've got pigs and lambs and cows and we're all rolling in these rewilded woods of Europe, That's not what I'm saying. But by stewards, what I mean is that we don't go out of our way to cause harm and suffering, to look after animals doesn't mean we have to do anything special for them. Just don't hurt them. Just don't put them in farms, incarcerate them, mutilate them, and murder them. That's all it is. We don't have to do anything special in our life. In fact, being vegan is a passive action. It requires nothing from us other than to not hurt someone else. And so that's what I mean by being a steward. It's not to create some nonsensical idea of a perfect world, because perfection can't exist. Life will always have suffering involved. Nature is cruel and violent by its nature, but we don't have to be cruel and violent. We have the option to rationalize and logically think through our choices, to challenge our behaviors and attitudes, and then change accordingly. In fact, we have a responsibility to do that. And so when we look at how we view animals, well, what reasons do we have to justify doing all these things to them, and also the environmental consequences that come as a result of what we do to them? We say, well, it's cultural and traditional, which is true, but should culture and tradition dictate what's right and wrong, or our morals? Last year, the Winter Olympics took place in South Korea. I found it really confusing because some of the British press was saying the athletes shouldn't go and compete. I thought, what's going on in South Korea that's so terrible? I mean, these athletes have trained their entire life for this moment. It could be their proudest achievement, and we're asking them to not go? Well, why? It's because in South Korea they have a dog meat trade and they eat dogs, right? We eat chickens, pigs, cows, turkeys, ducks, geese, foie gras, salmon, tuna, mackerel, all these animals, and they eat one more, a dog, and all of a sudden we're like, boycott going to South Korea. This is disgusting. How could they be so horrible? Now, some of these athletes went and rescued a dog from a dog meat farm in South Korea. I thought that was a great thing to do. I like that. But the British press said that they were animal rights heroes, animal rights activists. Undeniably, we have a special relationship with dogs. We love dogs very much, and rightfully so. Dogs are pretty cool, right? I remember I saw this film called I Am Legend, right? Have you seen it? It's got Will Smith in it. He's like the last man on earth. It's covered in vampires, and he has a dog in the film. I think it came out in 2007. I was about 13 years old. I saw it in the cinema, and to be honest with you, I couldn't care less about Will Smith. I like Will Smith. I like Will Smith. I think he's a pretty good guy, right? I quite like him. But at the same time, in this film, I couldn't care less if he lives or dies, to be honest with you, right? But his dog, damn. His dog dies in the film. I'm sorry for the spoiler, but his dog dies in the film. It's not instrumental to the plot, but he dies in the film. And I remember I had a little cry in the cinema. I was like, how could you? The dog, right? Because we do have a special attachment with these animals. I appreciate that. But what is the difference, right? What is the difference between the animals that we love in our home, the animals we give a name to, Fluffy the cat, or Baxter the dog, right? And what is the difference between the animals that we eat on our plate and who get a numerical value and referred to as it, rather than looked at as the individuals that they are, these sentient beings that of course they are? Why do we have these contradictory notions of life, these arbitrary distinction of what animal deserves to live and what animal deserves to die? For what? I mean, as humans, right, we recognize that we're different in so many wonderful and unique ways. No, differences make us beautiful and interesting and amazing. But really, it's not our differences that are of any real credibility, not credibility, but of any real importance to the conversation. It's actually what we have in common that is paramount to the way that we should treat each other. We're of course alive, we're sentient and conscious, we can suffer and feel pain, we also experience happiness and joy. We have a spectrum of emotions, of intellectual capacities, but importantly, our life is unique to us. What I mean by that is no one else will ever live the life that we live. The way we see the world, the experiences that we have, the adventures that take place before us are intrinsically unique to us, because everything is viewed for the insular and myopic world that we live in. Okay? What about the non-human animals? Do they tick any of those boxes as well? Are they alive? Of course, but are they sentient and conscious? Well, yes, especially the ones that we exploit so freely, as defined by the Declaration of Consciousness from the University of Cambridge. Do they experience suffering and pain? Yes, they do. Can they experience happiness and joy? Yeah, they can. Different to us, of course, but it's not about what makes them happy or what makes them joyful, but instead the relativeness and subjectivity of those emotions and feelings. That's what's important. And of course, no other animal will live the life that they live. It's intrinsically unique to them based on the experiences that they have. So why do we use them and exploit them in so many ways? Sometimes people say to me, they say, Ed, I'll go vegan the day that you convince a lion to go vegan, because if a lion can eat meat and they're an animal and I'm an animal, then so can I. And I thought, well, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because obviously lions kill zebras and gazelles because they have to survive. We don't go into Lidl and buy chicken breast because it's absolutely fundamentally crucial for our living and our survival, right? Beside the point, of course, what lions do should never be a good role model for how we view our morals and codes and values, right? Because let's put it into perspective, lions kill other lions, don't they? They murder each other in effect. We would never justify murder because lions do. Imagine going to court, someone's killed someone, and the judge goes, what's your defense? And they say, well, lions kill other lions, right? And if I'm an animal and they're an animal, why can't I? And the judge goes, case dismissed, great, fantastic. Well, right. Not obviously ridiculous, right? But the point is, of course, lions are not good role models for how we should live, right? Sometimes people say to me, but you wouldn't be alive if your ancestors didn't eat meat, Ed. Imagine if your ancestors were vegan, they'd have all perished years ago. But that's also true as well, of course. My ancestors did eat meat, and I probably wouldn't be alive today if they didn't. But why does that have a bearing on how I should live, or how any of us should live? And why would we look to our primitive Neanderthal ancestors again to base our morality in a contemporary modern setting? We simply wouldn't. There was a plane crash in the 1970s in the Andes, and the survivors of this plane crash survived because they cannibalized on the dead passengers, the ones who had died in the crash. Cannibalism in that moment was a morally justifiable act, but cannibalism in everyday society certainly isn't a morally justifiable act. I see something similar with how we use animals. In those times of necessity for survival, we can justify it. But in times like contemporary times like today for us in this room, we can't justify it because it's not a necessity in the same way that it used to be or has been in the past. I can talk. Wow, 8. Is that really the time?
Yes.
Well, I'll be finishing in a few minutes, right? So we have time for a question. 10 minutes, I'm getting a 10-minute signal. I think it's really important to always have time for questions at the end, because it's not fair for someone just to talk and then go, well, that's it, and then run out so no one can question them, right? So we're going to make sure we have time for questions. I'll take about 5-10 minutes more. A couple more points I want to make. And I want to talk specifically just about labels, okay? Now, these industries operate on profits. They have to sell us something to survive. We go into a supermarket and we're confronted with a few different types of labels. One of the things we often hear is the notion of humane slaughter, don't we? We kill animals in a humane way. Often, actually, I know it's the same here in Germany, I've had it said to me, but in the countries where we live, we have this idea that the way that we treat animals is intrinsically better than anywhere else in the world, right? I get it in the UK all the time. UK animal farmers, they tell me, Ed, why don't you go to Russia or China or even America, right, and campaign to change farming practices there? Because the UK, the way we treat animals is better than everywhere else. Yes, of course, bad things happen to animals, but not here, right? We kill our animals humanely. What does humanely mean, of course? What does humane slaughter mean? Sometimes people say to me, Ed, I'm with you, I agree with you. I'm so against things like halal and kosher. I think halal and kosher slaughter are barbaric, which is why I buy animals that have been killed humanely. Okay, well, what does that mean, humane? Now, when we have a word like humane next to an action like slaughter, we really have to define what that word humane means. Let's open up an imaginary thesaurus, right? There's the word humane. What other words are there? Well, there's compassion, there's benevolence, there's kindness. Okay, that's interesting. So what's compassionate slaughter? What is benevolent slaughter? Really, the question is, how do you compassionately or benevolently take the life of someone who doesn't have to die and who doesn't want to die? I mean, animals don't willfully walk onto the kill floor of the slaughterhouse. They're forced there against their will. No animal presents their throat for the knife. Their lives are taken from them non-consensually. And so how can taking someone's life unnecessarily against their will be possibly called compassionate or benevolent? Surely it's contradictory to the notion of being compassionate to someone to kill them needlessly. So humane slaughter is what we define as being an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. It's a contradictory use of the two words. Now, to put it into perspective, the humane way of killing pigs in the European Union, Australia and America, as well as the gas chamber. 2 or 3 pigs are loaded into a metal cage that's dropped into an abyss. The abyss is filled with carbon dioxide, causes them to suffocate. It takes about 30 seconds for them to die or so, but the CO2 burns the moisture behind their eyes and in their throats and causes them intense amount of pain and suffering. It's online if you want to watch it. It's not pleasant, but it is what happens. The reason the industry calls it humane is because they get to die together. Wow, what a mercy. Normally, they would be killed one at a time. Electricity in their head, hung up there by their foot, and a knife across their throat. Single. Very barbaric to kill an animal one by one, right? So this time they get to die together. And the industry wants to tell us it's humane or compassionate or benevolent to gas pigs to death. how do you justify that? Think about it. Do you know what upsets me, actually? Right now in the European Union, there's a debate happening about whether vegan burgers should be allowed to be called burgers, and whether oat milk should be allowed to be called milk. I think in Germany you can't call oat milk milk anyway, right? And the reason they say that is because it's misleading to consumers. So it's like, as a consumer, we walk into Aldi and we're like, damn, Havermilk, oat milk. It says oat, has a picture of an oat, but it also says milk. Right? What does this mean? And then they buy it, because it says milk, right? So I'm going to buy it. They take it home, they pour it on their cereal, they eat it and go, this isn't cow's milk. Vegans, you know. Not again, right? Every time I go in Aldi. They think we're that stupid, right? But they don't actually think we're that stupid. That's not the real reason they're doing it. But think of how absurd this is, right? Legally, you can't call oat milk milk. But what you can do is say that an animal was killed humanely by being thrown into a gas chamber. Because that's not misleading at all, is it? It's not misleading to tell people that the way we treat animals is nice and normal and humane. No, that's fine. We don't see that. We don't get shown about it. We get told about it. We just get given labels that make us feel comfortable. But oat milk, Christ, no. How immoral is that, right? But no, let's take it a little bit further. I'm being a little bit facetious. I appreciate that, but it's for a point. Now, the dairy industry, this will be my final thing. I say that about every 10 minutes, don't I, right? In Tesco's, we have this, well, in the UK we have a supermarket called Tesco. I like Tesco's a lot. Tesco's is good. Whole range of great vegan products. I'm a big fan of Tesco. But they do one thing they do many things, but one thing really, really grinds my gears. When you walk down the dairy aisle, they have this thing, right? And it says, happy cows produce happy milk. Well, first of all, what's happy milk, right? Milk with emotions is quite disturbing. Yeah, milk that dances its way out of the udder, right? It's just like proper beaming to be in the bottle. Like, what? Happy milk? Firstly, that's outrageous, okay? I hear we treat our cows really nicely because happy cows produce happy milk. How childish are they? Anyway, besides the point. What does that actually mean? Now, in the UK, we talk about having high welfare standards. We actually do. The UK is rated A for welfare, which means that the UK, Switzerland, Austria, and New Zealand are the best in the world. Nobody treats their animals better than we do. You guys are a B. Oh, B. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not an A though, right? So this is the dairy industry in an A-rated welfare system, okay? Cows are mammals. They only produce milk to feed their children. I thought cows ate grass and out came milk when I was younger. Of course not. Cows are mammals. They will only lactate when they have a child. So farmers forcibly impregnate or artificially inseminate dairy cows every single year. This is done, I'm being given the term. No, I'm going to check it. This is done, right, by the farmer getting bull semen, right? Now, think about what that looks like. Okay, so there's a bull. You have to get semen from a bull. What way do we do that? That's exactly the way it's done, right? Think about that, right? Think about how weird it is that we pay someone to do that, to get semen from a bull. I find that quite unnerving. Now we've got bull semen. We take it to the dairy farm. The farmer restrains the dairy cow in like a metal cage. This cage is used for things like vaccines, antibiotics, for things like bovine TB jabs as well. It's used for a whole host of things. It's also used for the insemination. Now, cows are inseminated by the farmer placing his arm inside the anus of the dairy cow, penetrates the anus, puts his arm inside, and then holds her cervix through the lining of the anus. He then takes the bull semen, injects the bull semen through her vagina and into her cervix. Cow's gestation or pregnancy is about 9 months, similar to that of a human. When she gives birth, the calf only needs the first feed. The first feed has colostrum in it, which is full of antibodies. Once the calf's had the first feed, there's no more milk needed for the calf, because cows produce milk for humans, right? So that would be weird if the baby was drinking the mother's milk, right? That doesn't make much sense. I think it's strange how we drink our mother's milk, and then we wean off our mother's milk, don't we? And then we wean onto the milk of someone else's mother. It's just that someone else's mother is from an entirely different species, right? And then we're weaning on that, well, we're on that milk for about 60, 70, 80 years of life, just constantly sucking from someone else's mum. I find that slightly concerning, right? I always say to people, like let's say you were driving, or you were, passing a dairy field, so a field with dairy cows. Do you ever go in and just have a little drink, Oof, it's a warm day today, a bit of milk, right? No, it'd be weird, wouldn't it? Now imagine if you saw someone doing that. I find that was so weird, right? If I saw someone drinking straight from a cow, I find that so unnerving. But what's the difference? The farmer takes the milk, puts it in a bottle, and then we drink it. What difference does that make in terms of the actual action of taking the milk? Female calves are placed in solitary confinement hutches. These hutches are about 2 meters long, maybe 1.5 meters wide. They can legally spend the first 8 weeks of their life in these hutches. The first 8 weeks of their life is without their mother, no maternal or nurturing or feeding, no exercise, no playing, no companionship, not with any other calves. They can see them, but they can't get to them. And the calves are really just big dogs, They like to play and jump around. And then we deny them any of those rights. Well, the right to their own autonomy, I suppose, their own existence and control of their own being. Males are useless to the dairy industry. They won't produce milk, as producing milk is a female reproductive process. Because they won't produce milk, they're useless. Sometimes they're killed for veal, sometimes they're sold into the beef herd. But for many dairy calves, they're a different breed to the animals that we raise for beef, meaning that there's not enough money in them to keep them alive. And so 90,000 male dairy calves in the UK every single year are shot almost immediately after birth and discarded as a byproduct because they're born male and there's no money to be made from them. So we just shoot them, right? Just a little baby boy, just shoot them in the head because there's no money there, right? Oh, happy cows produce happy milk. Remember, I forgot about that, okay. So now we move on, right? Because now the dairy cows are lactating. So they're hooked up to milking machines 2 or 3 times a day, every single day, until they get forcibly impregnated again. And then they're taken to a slaughterhouse after average about 4 to 6 years of their life, where they have a bolt put in their head and they're hung up by their foot and have their throats cut with a knife. Right, happy cows produce happy milk. Remember, oat milk is misleading, but we can say happy cows produce happy milk whilst we're literally bolting these happy cows in the head and then cutting their throats. I don't know. What I want to suggest, or what I want to emphasize with that part really, is to show that actually these industries lie to us and manipulate us all the time. Because if we was told that, let's say we see a piece of camembert on the shelf, and it says this piece of camembert came from mother who's currently in a slaughterhouse, whose baby has just been shot in the head, we go, damn, that vegan cheese doesn't sound too weird anymore, right? And I'll be honest, some vegan cheese is nasty, right? Some of it's bad. Some of it's amazing. Hit and miss, right? I get that. But at the same time, let's finish it, okay? How do we justify what we do? Let's create an imaginary scale. Let's place taste. Let's one side. We'll even place convenience and habit, because that's what it is. It's convenient and it's habitual. But on the other side, we place life, don't we? Life of the animal, but also potentially life of our planet. If we consider that being vegan is the single biggest thing that we can do to help the planet, then that also has to sit on the other side as well. Where do we see value? What weighs more? What has more veracity? What do we think should be viewed as having more authenticity and more of an obligation? A meal to us lasts a matter of minutes, 15 minutes, let's say. When we finish it, it's done. But that meal could have cost someone their entire life depending on what we choose to eat. Not only that, it could have contributed to a system that's destroying our environment. 15 minutes, so much suffering and so much devastation. 15 minutes. An inconsequential amount of time, something we consume, we forget about and get on with our lives. Sometimes with lunch, we grab something, eat it as quick as we can because we've got to get back to work or get back to studying. Maybe that's a chicken sandwich. We buy it, done in 3-4 minutes. Someone's life gone. 3 or 4 minutes of our time. Something we buy, eat, and go. But then, someone has lived a life of suffering and then death for that? For that? How do we justify that? Or more importantly, do we ask ourselves a series of questions? Do we say, look, I recognize that there's a chain behind everything I buy, and I have a huge amount of power as an individual with my mindsets, but also with my consumer choices to create a world that facilitates violence or contributes to a world that reduces violence significantly. Well, what choice do I then make? And if I can't think of a justification for what I do or the way that I live currently, then I have to challenge myself to think deeper and to look at myself and reflect and say, well, why don't I just give this thing a go, this vegan thing? What have I got to lose from trying it? Because the reality is that taste or life thing is actually not fair, because going vegan doesn't mean you have to give up the taste of things. Beyond Meat sausages are insanely good, right? So are the burgers. Vegan products now are really good, really good. And so we don't even have to view taste as being one of the options, because really it's taste or taste life of the animal and life of the planet as well. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.